to start talking, I can do that. Okay, thank you. This is Nina Perlmutter. You're at the Kennebunkport Planning Board on May 5th. Tom, our chair, is out for most of the evening. He may join us later, so I'll be chairing the planning board. I want to welcome everybody. I'm vice chair of the Kennebunkport Planning Board. This is a virtual planning board meeting. We're using Zoom conferencing format. The agenda on the town's website has the information needed for the public to participate by Zoom conferencing format or by telephone. If you wish to participate through Zoom, you can join this webinar with the ID of 920-4640-9044. You can also dial in by phone on or at area code 929, number 205-6099. You will be asked to enter the meeting ID number 920-4640-9044, followed by the pound sign. If you are conferencing in by phone or through Zoom and watching this on cable or YouTube, you must turn down your volume or we will have feedback. As always, you can watch us on the television on channel 1301 or stream us on YouTube at Kennebunkport Television. During the meeting, only planning board and current participants are, as selected by the board, will be on the screen with audio connected. All other participants will be blocked out and audio muted except when the board solicits public input. If a public hearing is on the agenda for a particular topic, as the first item is tonight, the applicant and the board members will have discussions, after which I'll open the public hearing. At that time, anyone who wishes to be heard should raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll recognize those people in turn. If you happen to be using your telephone to connect, raise your hand is *6 and toggle mute is *9. We have a pretty full agenda tonight, but I wanted to mention, if you are working from an older agenda, that number 6, Ocean Woods Sebago Techniques Authorized Agent, is postponed and will not be on again, until May 19th. So if you're sitting around waiting for that, you'd be waiting for a long time, till the next 2 weeks. So that will not be on the agenda tonight. I'd like to take attendance of the planning board members who are here. I see Ed Francis and I see George.
Hi.
And go ahead. And Werner is here now, I believe. Okay, and myself. So we have a quorum. That's 3. All of us have to agree, I believe, to pass anything. And there's Werner. Okay. And with that attendance, I'd like to move to the approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any questions about the minutes? Any corrections to the minutes? Did anyone find they were pretty brief? Okay, then I'd like to have a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
And a second?
I would second. Second.
Okay. Then I'll take a vote. All in favor to approve the minutes? Ed?
In favor?
George?
In favor.
Okay, and I'm in favor, so the minutes are approved. Okay, item number 1 on our agenda is the Henry Family Trust Civil Consultants Authorized Agent. If you would bring forward the agent for the trust, we could have. This is actually a public hearing at this point, but first we'd have the agent describe what is proposed to be done, and then questions from the planning board before we open it up to the public. So, do we have the agent from the Henry Family Trust? I'm not sure who that was last.
Yes, That would be Jeff Oliva.
With his hand up.
Yep. And it also looks like Amy McNally is also, she's a representative as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi. So, Madam Chairman, would you like me just to start reviewing the project?
Yes, if you give a brief review of the project, I don't think you need to do it to be very long. There are no revisions to it that I know of at this point.
That is correct. Again, my name is Jeff Oliva. I'm an engineer with Civil Consultants. Also with me is Amy McNally, who is the attorney helping to represent the property owners. What we have here tonight is a resubmission of a proposed pier and seasonal float at the property. What we have done is we looked at the previous denial. We have revised the plans to reduce the overall length of the pier and the float to be able to meet the maximum length requirement of 100 feet. We have gone through and received updated approvals through the Maine Department of Environmental Protection and the Army Corps of Engineers. Those approvals were included in the submission package. I also included in the package a checklist with respect to how this project meets the requirements of Section 240 5.11. And during the last denial, it seemed like the only item that was not in agreement with the ordinance was the overall length, where we have, and when we get to the public comment, I can share my screen or have the site plan shared with the public to show how the project meets the intent of the ordinance requirements.
Okay, why don't you do that?
Okay. All right. So the first plan I'm showing here is the overall bird's eye view of the project. What we have here is, starting on the left-hand side, is a pathway that currently comes down towards the water. It extends kind of from the top corner down to the bottom corner currently here. Our proposal is to remove this existing pathway, have it curve down into this section where we will now have some stairs that will come up to the pier. The pier length is 51.6 feet, where then it will transition into the aluminum sloping ramp that goes down to the float that is there into the water for the access for the boat. I'm going to share the next screen, which is the section view of the system. The top of the page indicates, again, the plan view, the overhead bird's eye. The bottom section is the section view through the structure. We have the grade coming from the left to right down to the water. We have a section of wetlands that we've received approvals to add our mulch berm walkway to. We have stairs that come up onto the pier, the 56.6-foot pier that goes down to the float, or goes down to the aluminum ramp and the float. The pier itself meets the requirements. It's 4 foot in width. It exceeds the minimum height requirement above the adjacent grade, and we also indicate on the plan how the project meets the pile spacing requirements indicated in the ordinance. Again, we come down to the question here. At the meeting last time, there was a question about how there was discussion in the past approval about removing this back. What we've looked at is a way to make sure that the float itself stays level through the use of differing ramps underneath to make sure that it accommodates the sloping area of that section of the mud flat. That's really about it. I can answer questions better.
Okay. I have a question that is bothering me from reading your memorandum and from reading the basically the DEP report and so forth. What I see here is in your lengths, a 7-foot long stair, a 51.56 foot long fixed pier, 33 foot long seasonal gangway, and a 10-foot long seasonal float. And when I add those together, and I've done it a couple of times, unless I'm doing something very wrong, I come out with 101.56 feet.
Yep.
Not
98 something.
Yeah, I think if we look at, I'm going to share my screen again just to get to that point when we look at that area there. So if we look at what we have on this side, and this is includes the dimensions of those areas there. So we have the 7-foot stair here, the 51.56 length on this side. Then we have this 33-foot hinged section of the ramp that comes down, and then the float where the ramp sits inside of that float. So the overall is that 98.77 feet. We are less than 100 feet with our dimensions.
Are you trying to say that instead of adding up the length of all of the structures you're putting in there, because they're angled, that you only cover 98.77 feet of ground?
That is correct.
Okay.
So this plan here, as presented, indicates is to scale with respect to the relationship for the elevation difference.
It looks like you've got a 2.5 foot overlap up between the ramp and the float. Is that what I'm?
Yeah. Yes. There is. Yeah. Yeah. The float is 10 feet in length, and yes, there is a section there where that ramp has to be able to be connected onto the float itself for the hinge, and that's roughly about 2.5 to 3 feet in off of the edge of that.
And I think that's again, I know there's some angles, but the major part of this is that the difference between, the number you're computing and the overall length is mainly due to that overlap.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay.
But he's talking about coverage of ground and water.
And you're also showing it at low tide. And
Yeah.
as it swings up in the tide, it's going to change that arc. I'm not a mathematical
That's
whiz,
right.
but I don't know what that
Yes,
length is
yeah.
then.
Right,
But as the tide goes up, it gets longer.
right.
It would seem so.
Well, what I'm reading basically in the land use ordinance on 5/11/15 is dock or wharf, including ramps and floats, shall be no longer than a total length of 100 feet or extend and so forth and so on. But, that does not say the coverage over the land. That says basically the total length of the structures you're putting in there. And I don't see how it fits under these ordinance, under the ordinance.
I agree.
That's what's bothering me.
I think that if we go back to other peers, I wish we had our old friend Neil here, that we have in fact allowed for this overlap to be debited from in the overall length, regardless of how many different structures. In other words, if that
Correct.
float went the entire length of the ramp, you wouldn't add it in. It's the end-to-end length that we've ruled on in the past.
Have you considered the ladder instead
I
of
don't
steps?
remember ruling on that.
Yeah, when I looked at the denial and then talking with town staff and looking at other projects, it appears that this has been the way that it has been reviewed in the past for other pier structures on there that the length is that start to finish of that area as it sits down there at that low tide. And for this case, it sits on the flat at low tide, that we are under that 100-foot total length.
Based on that criteria, or those criteria, yes, it is. I'm not certain that those are the criteria we've used on other docks.
No, this is not what I've seen reviewed on other docks, and
It's not the criteria in the denial either.
It's not the criteria in the land use ordinance. That's what's bothering me. I mean, if we start to nitpick this way, then people are going to be playing around with floats and ramps and stairs, and I really don't. But then I don't like docks and marshes anyway. But
If I may interject.
aside from that, go ahead.
And yes, I'm Amy McNally from Ralph Often's office pitch hinting tonight. And I'm just rereading, although I'm a little bit new to this, I am rereading the denial. And the language in the denial does say the approximate assembled length. And then also section 15, which the board pointed to, speaks to a length requirement, but also in the same sentence, although it's a different requirement, talks about the extension of the dock. So I think it's reasonable to infer from both the language of the denial and the language of the ordinance that the measuring stick really here is how far it extends, and not, as you kind of suggest, adding up the certain pieces. That would be in my interpretation. I would just ask the board to consider that.
Adding up the pieces is important because of the overlap onto the float. But in adding up the pieces, if you want to use that language of the extension of the dock, we are not showed an extended dock. We're showed a dock at low tide,
That's right.
which is shorter than a dock at high tide. I don't know what the measurements are at high tide, but that's going to swing an arc, and that arc is going to have a different measurement. And the denial last time was originally we were given a dock that was something like 150 feet long, and then came back with one that was still much too long. This one may or may not be under 100 feet, but the way it's presented, I can't tell.
I have to agree with that. Once it's up at high tide, it's going to extend much further, and I don't think it's going to meet the requirements.
At some point, 100 feet, 101 feet, 99 feet, the good citizens of Kennebunkport came up with a number, and the number was 100 feet. I need to demonstrate that it's under 100 feet. I don't see that.
Okay, I guess then what I'd like to do is to be able to have the opportunity to show the board that it does meet that 100 foot requirement.
At high tide.
Is that the board wants to look at that at high tide? I can do that analysis.
I want to know what that is, and we also need to look back onto former docks that have been before the board and see if this calculation of an angle was admitted into total length. I know it's you could just raise the main part of that pier up another couple of feet and reduce the angle even more if that's the occasion. We need clarification on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just I guess a technical question that I have here. Jeff, how is the float anchored in place? How is it kept in place?
The float is attached to the ramp itself with a bracket that has a hinge on it that allows that to move with the tide. And it has a similar hinge back at the connection to the pier. So as the tide raises along this area, it picks up the float and it slides and it hinges along that side.
Yeah. Okay.
And on that float, on the diagram we're shown, there's some sort of device that allows it to rest at level on the flats. But on the left side, if I see that float, I just see the raw edge of that float resting on the, as you call it, the mud flat, which looks to me like right there, it's still on the slope of the intertidal zone. I can't be certain. It's a very small cove, and there's a lot of concern that was expressed last time in the public hearings about erosion from that float. There were other parts of that submission that did not meet the requirements, but we haven't even had any discussion about the effects of that float on the flats and erosion.
That is correct. There was a lot of discussion about that, and we've received letters since then with this new application. There is a lot of concern about putting another private dock into an area that's basically an estuary, and the erosion that's been happening. And I can tell you right now that in my reading of coastal marshes, I know for certain, being a biologist, that the marshes and the estuaries are the carbon source for the sea. They're extremely important in terms of being the source of the basis of the food chain for fish and for shellfish and for
Birds.
everything that grows around in the ocean. For birds as well, for nesting birds. And the other thing I've been reading is the newer materials that are coming out in terms of what docks and flats and floats and so forth do to the movement of water that helps that helps to contain the silt and build up mud, and is causing problems with coastal flooding, especially with climate change going on. So there's a lot of concern there about putting a dock into an estuary like this, especially a small estuary. And I have some concerns about that, and I believe the abutters have some concerns about that as well.
In addition, Nina, this isn't just this particular application. This is docks in general. The marsh lambs, we draw them in with a nice straight line, but they are not immutable. They change over time. They move. If you look at photographs over time, you'll find that they grow in places and they recede in places. And entering into something that's on the flats themselves is going to alter that natural course. Part of the reasons for this ordinance is, and I'm a biologist as well, is to protect these shoreland resources. And I'm not even seeing the spirit of this.
Yeah.
In the last application, there was a consideration that the owners had looked for alternatives, and they had looked at other places where a boat could be kept in Kennebunkport. And the poor marinas were inundated by phone calls from all the board members and half the citizenry trying to find out if there were in fact available floats. In the time since then, I don't know if they've looked at finding an alternative to where they could keep their boat in town. But I would imagine that over the past year or so that slips have opened up. I don't know if they've looked into that.
Yeah, I believe they have looked into that, and it's a similar situation where the backlog of available area is not there for them.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So we're in a situation where, a private homeowner, likes to be able to use the land to its fullest extent, and I understand that. I have 800 feet on the Kennebunk River, but I won't even put in a dock there, and even though I don't have, I can put it away from marshes. But on the other hand, it's kind of sad that we don't have public docks that can accommodate everybody in Kennebunkport that want to put their boats in the water. At one time, the Board of Selectmen had a moratorium, I believe, on all new docks, and I don't know why they lifted it. I think they should have been putting in some new public docks to alleviate this problem. So it's sad on the one hand that a homeowner can't do what they would like to do and being near the water, be able to put their boat in. But on the other hand, it's highly detrimental to an area like that to put in a new dock. In fact, some of the old docks should go. And the more we know about coastal marshes and estuaries, the less we should be allowing any kind of manipulation on them.
But the current ordinance allows this opportunity for the homeowner to present this to the town for review.
Yes, that's true, but it doesn't say where. And we have reasons for denial in our land use ordinance under 1010 that basically if it's detrimental, I have it in front of me. The proposed use will have an adverse impact on significant scenic pieces or on significant wildlife habitat, which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. There's another one in the resource protection zone. Will not result in water pollution, erosion, or sedimentation to surface waters, and this certainly would. And again, adverse impact on spawning grounds, fish, aquatic life, bird, or other wildlife habitat. Will conserve shore cover and visual as well as actual points of access to inland and coastal waters. There are a lot of reasons why this dock shouldn't go in. And on top of that, you still haven't met the requirement. The longer a dock goes over marshland, the more you have impact from the pilings and from the shading. And I can tell you right now that I know that land, which absolutely requires high light, and you would lose it if you shade it too much. And that's one of them called saltmarsh hay. So there are significant reasons that we didn't go into the last time.
If we look at what the Army Corps requires and what the main DEP requires for height to reduce the impact of shading, and that is at least 1 foot of vertical clearance for every foot of width of the ramp or the pier. And this pier meets the ordinance requirements of 4 feet. Our closest area is 4.36 feet for clearance underneath. And then as it goes from left to right, then that increases that area. So we're exceeding the minimum requirements that are stipulated by DEP and Army Corps. They've also reviewed the project looking at fish species, also any kind of other aquatic plants and animals in this area, and they've granted approval to this application in this location. And that goes through Army Corps, DEP, Fish and Wildlife for their reviews. And they've all indicated that there is not detrimental impact for this project in that location.
Yeah, well, we've been through this before too. The DEP is not the planning board, and it's not the town of Kennebunkport. Neither is the Army Corps of Engineers. And I think they basically do stop that. But there is a long-term, and use the stairs to get to that height. That's shading right there. And your ramp comes down, and that's shading right there. All of those grasses out there in the marshes and so forth are used to very high light intensities. There are species that require high light intensities. And they help keep that mud and water runoff. And when you change that by allowing silt to build up around pilings, and you change those little channels of water, you start to get the silt built up, and you start to get changes to the coastal marshlands that tend to be detrimental over time. So I understand that the DEP goes out there and looks for significant changes, and the Army Corps of Engineers too, but they often rubber stamp these things without looking at long-term effects. They're not there to do that right now. They really aren't. Oh,
Well, if I may, I mean,
go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I mean,
Go
I
ahead.
think it is important to point out that the DEP permit application and approval has language that's very, very similar to what's in the ordinance as far as the adverse effect. It's almost verbatim from the language that's in there. So I think it's unfair to say that that's a rubber stamp coming from our state agency. And I think that it sounds like the board is almost putting its own moratorium on installation of docks if it takes this position on every dock application. I think the ordinance exists for a reason, to put specific parameters around these docks and allow for private homeowners to install them consistent with the ordinance. I understand that the board is looking for some more clarity around the length thereof, and it sounds like Mr. Aliv is more than willing to do that. But I think beyond that, I think it's unfair to just put a blanket, stop on this dock by virtue of it being a dock when the ordinance does allow for it.
We have to put a stop on it.
We're not putting a moratorium on docks. We're basically looking at the effect on estuaries and marshlands, which are extremely important. We don't put a moratorium on docks. We look at docks and rivers. We look at docks that go out to the ocean from the shorelands. And we have worked on those docks as well. And have approved them. But when you're in a marsh where, it's for the shellfish fisheries, basically, that's a different situation. It really is a very different situation. So we're not overall just saying no docks. We're looking at where the dock is being put in. And you're not the first dock that I've said that I have real reservations about. The planning board have not. But in this situation, I think, it's not a good place to put a dock. And I feel for the homeowners. I think they're between a rock and a hard place here. I'm a homeowner with significant shoreline, and I have a boat, and I'm lucky in that I have areas that are not marshy where I can just put my boat directly right into the water within a few feet. I don't need to put it. It would be better to put in a dock. It would be more convenient, but I don't have to. And I think a lot of people are that way. And I could easily get approved for a dock, but I just don't feel comfortable putting one in.
I guess my concern is that we have the blessing of the DEP. We have an engineer indicating all the steps taken to minimize any impact, and I think there's no professional here saying otherwise. So I think that's a concern from my point of view, that a conclusion is being drawn by that. So on behalf of the applicants, that's a concern.
Well, I think the planning board comes from different places, and I think you have two professionals here right now. My PhD is in cell biology, but I worked on seaweeds and I worked on coastal areas with ecologists. And I think George as well is a biologist, and he understands the impact here. I think we both do. So you have some expertise looking at this. And yes, I don't think, I look at every DEP approval and agree with them, and sometimes I just don't, depending on what's happening and where the application is going. But right now, getting away from that, I still think your dock is over the length limit. And you haven't shown me anything to say that it's not. And when the town of Kennebunkport says 100 feet, I'm gonna go by 100 feet.
I think what I need to do is show the dock at high tide and indicate to show that it is less than the maximum 100-foot distance.
I think that would be a good start. Does anyone want to discuss this anymore? Right.
Well, yes.
Because I would like to,
Larry,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry I joined you late. It took me
Yeah.
15 minutes to log on for some reason, and then it took me another 20 minutes to get elevated to participate in the meeting. So I did have some questions on this, and one of them is that pertains to the float and the hinges. So the float is secured by anchors, right? You have some chains. And
Right.
so when I see something like this, I'm thinking one end is hinged, like the hinge at the walkway end. But isn't the other end on rollers or a slide? Because like George said, as the tide goes up, it's going to tend to push out. If it's hinged, it's going to tend to push out from its current position. And it seems like in order to maintain your 98.77 feet, you have to have the end on the float on rollers or on some kind of a slide.
Yeah.
So that's my first question. Is that
Yeah.
how you have it there?
Yeah, there will be a roller system in there, and I don't know
Well,
the
that
slide,
solves it.
what that transition is, and I'll get that information.
yeah, you have to have a roller in there. You can't
Yep.
have it. So that is how you maintain your 98.77 feet. So I'd like you to revise your drawing and show rollers on the float. That's my first question. My second question is, I didn't understand your proposed float skid detail. I don't see how the dimensions work out, okay? So I'm looking, this is on sheet L2.
Mhm.
So if you could add dimensions to all of your sketches there, that would help a lot. But the thing I noticed was you have this comment that you're going to maintain the float a minimum of 18 inches above the mud line. Okay? So I don't see how this works out. So anyway, add some dimensions, but my observation is without having the benefit of the dimensions available, is that I don't see how you can maintain, okay, let's just look at the elevation view. You've got the ramp, you got the aluminum hinged ramp, hinged one end, on rollers on the other end, and it goes down to your float. Well, it can't be 18 inches if it's, on the left-hand side. So I don't see how you can correlate your elevation view with your promise to maintain the float a minimum of 18 inches above the mud line. That's my first comment. My second comment is, I know from experience that the soil around here is very soft. I mean, it's just unbelievably soft. I mean, you got almost zero bearing strength. In fact, if it's saturated, you got zero bearing strength, okay? So that means anything you try to support in the soil is going to sink. So I think the elevation view you're showing is very hopeful. I don't see how there's going to be any way for at low tide for that float to actually be horizontal. It's going to be sunk right down into the mud, and there's going to be zero gap between the bottom of your float and the mud line. Unless you've got some sort of piling system in there that makes sure it is always elevated above the mud line. So I don't quite, the detail you're proposing there, even if you had some semi-cohesive material, it's still going to sink because the mud mats you've got shown there are way too small. Okay, they're not going to hold up anything. I mean, literally zero. So I think you really need to look hard at your proposed float skid detail and how you're going to honor your promise to keep the float a minimum of 18 inches above the mud line, knowing that the mud got zero bearing strength.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you could resolve all of those things, I think you'd have a bit better, a bit stronger case. Well, yes, a bit stronger case. And then I was also, I had a bunch of other technical details. No need to get into them right now, but I was also interested to read the DEP comment that you're only impacting the wetlands by 23 square feet. Well, that's only on the direct, that's by the mulch pathway. But the stairs are going to impinge an equal amount. I mean, they're 7 feet long and they're also 4 feet wide or something. That's going to be an additional 28 square feet. So I don't know I don't know at what point, I don't know what minimum we would impose about, or what maximum we would impose about, allow, I guess, in terms of how much area is impacted by the structure. But the 23 square feet is just from the mulch, but the little stairway is also going to have an impact, I think.
Yeah,
So,
it does. But when you look at the DEP, they don't look at the shading impact on a freshwater wetland. They look at that shading impact on the saltwater area. And where the stairs are and where those first two piles come in at the edge of the pier, that is still in the freshwater portion of the wetland, which doesn't have that issue, or the DEP doesn't have that concern with the shading in that section of the freshwater like they do on the saltwater side of the wetland.
okay. All right. Well, that's good. Okay. Well, I was very concerned. Okay. So my major concern is about the float end. I don't see how you're going to make that work out, to be honest. And then I guess one of the other issues that came to mind when I was looking at this is I see you're going to have your railings. Your railings are supported on some posts, right? 4x4 posts. And you're leaving the through bolts. Okay, you're going to connect that with through bolts. But I'd ask you to define that a little better. What size bolts, what material grade, because that's a pretty key connection. And of course, what I'm alluding to here is that OSHA requires a handrail or the supporting column, supporting post to withstand a horizontal load of 200 pounds placed at any location.
Yep.
And you've got a pretty good moment arm there. You're going to have a pretty good force on that bolt. And I know your handrails are something like, 4 feet apart or something. But anyway, just try to put a little, well, I'd like to see the definition of the bolt, the nut, and the washers you're planning to use.
Sure.
In that location, sizes, and then basically that's it. And then the other question I had was, are you going to paint this at all?
No.
Okay. Okay, well, those are my two major concerns. The float seems optimistic, and then the bolt, a little more clarification on what bolts. Bolts, nuts, and washers.
I can get that information for the board.
That's great. Thank you.
Does any other board member have any comment? No?
Yes.
Well, in that case, I'll open
Nina?
this up for, yes,
Nina?
Ed? Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone else is having the problem, but you're breaking up significantly on my end here. It's echoing, and I'm having word drop out.
I think Nina's connection is a little spotty tonight.
Yeah, so I just want you to be sensitive to that, and maybe be patient about us.
But we haven't lost any substance yet.
Okay, that's
I
good.
don't know that, actually, George, but
Textually, I inferred that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have one of the worst connections, I think, in Kennebunkport, and the earphones, the only way you can really hear me, so hopefully they're working properly.
Most of the time, I think we're hearing 80 to 90% of what you're saying.
Okay, then I'll try to go a little more slowly and see if
Yeah,
that
just-
will work a little better.
May I clarify for myself what I think I just learned from Larry's questioning? I went the first half hour thinking that there was a hinge on the float and that the outer edge of the float would be further into the channel at high tide than it is at low tide. That's what we were talking about. We were worried that at high tide, the ramp would swing up and therefore the float would go out. And we didn't know how far that was. And Jeff was gonna go refigure that. And then Larry questioned it. And I think I heard that the float is anchored somehow and that there's a roller connection and that the outer edge of that float does not move further into the channel as the ramp comes up. So I'd like to just understand which is it.
There's a roller between the ramp and the float itself, but there is a kind of an anchor chain that goes from corner to corner that keeps it from that orientation, because it's a seasonal float, and as it sits in there and the tide wants to push it back and forth, those crisscross ties create a tension that hold the ramp and the float in the same orientation. So there is, it's kind of like a static cable line that keeps it from going up and down the river. And then there is a roller that attaches to the float that allows that to pivot as the tide goes up and down.
Is the float anchored in any way to the ground?
No, if just by the nature of what they typically do is that there is a chain that is attached to the corner of the float. And I'm going to share my screen just so that it makes it maybe a little bit easier to see that.
Just trying to understand where the other end of that chain goes.
Yeah. So with this chain I'm showing in this heavy dash line goes back into here to a post that connects it, so that when the tide goes up and left and top to bottom in here, it keeps that in the same orientation, the float. And then there's the roller sits on here, so that as the tide moves with the hinge on the ramp, then that adjusts on that side.
So the length of those chains are going to define the longest extent of that float into the channel.
Correct, yeah. And along with the roller allowance on the float itself. So the connection here at the pier is like a door hinge.
Yes.
The connection here has a slide, and it's more of like a bar stuck in a box, and that box has a certain amount of travel. It's not an infinite number, so it's locked in, and I can get from the manufacturer what that slide distance is. So that's really what allows that, will give that the float amount of pivot as it comes out.
On this diagram, the end of the chains away from the two ends of the chain are on the float. The other ends are to circles. What are those again?
What they do is they'll put a helical mooring in, and then this is kind of a chain that for the most part lays on top of the mud, and then it comes up and it connects into here. It's more of like a second safety chain to keep it in the right orientation.
The other end of the chain, not the end that's on the float.
Yeah, this end here.
Yep. To?
That attaches to a helical mooring that is driven into the mud that has a bolt into it where that chain connects to.
All right.
And I'm just thinking there's actually a boat that goes on this, right? How big a boat could I put on that dock?
Well, the owners have
on a float that size.
Yeah.
I don't know what they have now. How big a boat could I put on a float that size?
Oh, on a float that size. I mean, you could put a 30 plus foot center console boat on here, and I think that they have.
Well, let's say we got a 30 foot
20-foot.
center console boat. Okay,
Yeah.
but let's say they got a 30, they decide to up the boat. They get a 30 foot, or the next owner decides to put in a 30-foot boat. Where's that 30-foot boat going to go? Is it just going to sit on the mud too?
Yes. At low tide, it does.
You've only got, what, did we decide last time, six hours of water?
6.5, just above 6.5 hours.
So that means that it's the other half the time it's sitting on the mud.
Correct.
I thought the last time the talk was it was mainly going to be kayaks and this type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
Well, it is kayaks, but they do have you asked me what the maximum size boat could be
Yeah.
onto that.
30-foot boat.
Yeah, but realistically, I think they've got an 18-foot center console boat that they would like to tie to that float along with kayaks.
Got it.
Okay.
And-
Well, realistically, someone else could put a 30-foot boat in there.
well, my impression is that if somebody owns a 30-foot boat, they're not going to let it sit on the mud. They're going to have a mooring somewhere else that they'll leave it tied up to. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how they're going to do this, but if I had a 30-foot boat and this dock, I would tend to just use a little runabout to go from the dock out to my boat moored somewhere else.
So
Or-
let's go to the
or-
20-foot boat that they apparently have. What about a 20-foot boat? Is it going to
Well, they're
sit on
still
the
not going
mud?
to let it sit on the mud, I don't think. I mean, I don't
They're going
think
to take it
most
out every
boats-
day, Larry?
I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do with it.
What
But,
about the next owner? It's a property, not necessarily the owner.
I think you made your point, George.
All right, I'll be quiet.
No, I think that I just had a little bit more to offer on that, but I think your comment is germane in that, you know, both you and Nina were eloquent in terms of your concern that doing anything here has the potential, increases the potential of somehow damage being caused to marshland. And, you know, once you put the pier in, then of course, what do you do with it? And how do you control that? So I think that's all part of that same concern that we talked about. And perhaps there's some conditions that would need to be levied as to the use of the dock. You know, you could contain some of that possibility in that regard, subject to the problem of enforcement. I wanted to just clarify what I learned from Larry's questioning. Though he pointed out that these little peg legs that are on the float look like if you set the float down, took the water out from under it, that they would go right into the mud. And it's almost like why bother having those legs? Jeff, what's your thinking there?
Yeah, well, there are different. I'm going to call, for lack of a better word, we're going to call them legs, just because of that.
Okay.
But but there are different ways to provide that support when you have a float that sits on a bottom at low tide.
Yeah.
Some are rails, some are feet that have a larger plate on the bottom
Right.
that gives that distribution of forces. And that is a case-by-case situation. So we look at here and going to say that situation with if it's a softer mud at this location, then that bottom plate, those bottom legs are going to have that flat plate that's going to sit as part of that bottom leg as that goes. Now, we talked about it at the last meeting is that as part of the reduction in the length from 116 to under 100 where we have it here, is that there is the potential, and we're going by survey information, we won't know until exactly in the field, but there's a slight angle difference in elevation from one side of the float to the other.
Sure.
We know that we have to keep the 18 inches of minimum clearance from the bottom of the leg to the underside of the float. And what we do then is if there is an elevation difference of 6 inches, so then we make sure that one is 18 and then one is, 24 to make sure that we have that difference on there. And that gives us the stability as it comes down with the tide, then that float sits there level.
And you would have the ability to adjust that year to year.
Correct.
Due to some storm or craziness.
Well, exactly, because, and also this is seasonal. So at the end of the season, the float and the ramp are removed,
Correct.
Put on upland away from the resource, and are not in there outside of the season. So they're not there for winter and typically early spring.
Why is it important to have the 18-inch of clearance that you've specified?
So, and it's a requirement through Army Corps and DEP, and it's more of a situation to allow movement of critters under that area, and also some light, but it's more because you're really a mud flat, but it's more of a situation where you have that gap space to allow the movement of any kind of animals inside that space.
Was a lot of talk about erosion in the opening remarks and concern for erosion. Is that a factor in your experience with to the extent the float were to come down and lift up in its entirety in that whole 10 by 20 area, be subjected to the suction of it going up and down?
I think there is some very small localized area of movement which you're going to get no matter what with any kind of float, but overall, no. And again, we're not in a situation where this is a high velocity channel.
No,
we're off to the edge of the mud flat. The mud flat is lack of a better word, flat along that edge, along that area. There's not a lot of elevation change that we see in the survey information in that area. When the tide goes down, it's more of just a consistent tide drop and up and down. There's not a velocity of water moving past that to create that erosion.
It's approximately a 10-foot swing tide.
Yeah, I think at the very high side, yeah, but not for this situation because we're where we're at was halfway through the tide with our elevation.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Anyone else?
So let me just go back and let me just finish my thought on this. So I think there's a couple of things needed. Not only the dimensions on your proposed float skid detail on both the elevation and plan views, but I think you also need to revise your elevation drawing of the overall assembly to show that you have at least 18 inches above the mud line in all locations. Okay, so what that's gonna tend to push the end of the hinged ramp, and roller the other and slide the other end. It's going to tend to increase that quite a bit above the mud line at the outside end. Anyway, if you could just revise that to show what it would actually look like to maintain at least 18 inches above the mud line in all locations, that would help a little bit. But the other question I have is, what evidence do you have that you can get a mud mat big enough to support the weight of this float? Because I guess the float's going to weigh, I don't know, a couple 100 pounds on mud that has essentially zero bearing strength.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm saying I still think the float is going to be heavy enough that it'll push the mud mats into the mud. But maybe you could help us understand why you think the soil has enough strength to take the weight of the float whenever it's supported on the mud mats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, along with being a civil engineer, I'm also a structural engineer as well. So I'm really familiar with bearing capacities and items like that. If I look at where we're at here, yes, the mud itself has a very low bearing capacity and a high susceptibility to be kind of squishy, lack of a better word, at that side. But what I can do is, I can easily calculate what the weight of the float is and determine what we need to do to look at what a width of a plank would be on the underside to make sure that it meets a requirement. The bearing capacity is not zero, but it's maybe it's 500 pounds per square foot, probably less than that.
Okay, I have some experience on. I built a little foundation around here, and I assumed 500 pounds per square foot, and it kept sinking. So I actually think during the rainy season, i.e., when the soil is saturated, and this will be saturated a lot more than my side yard, is probably down around 100. I don't know, 100 PSF or less. But then you have to have a safety factor on top of that. So. I think, I don't know. Yeah, take a hard look at it. I didn't look at it, but it'll be very interesting to see what you come back with.
Yep.
And so really study that float. That is the thing, and you really need to clarify. Then the other question I had was on your sheet L1. We were looking at the chains, the X configuration. So you have this other long chain. What is that doing there?
Well, no, and I guess that's some confusion there. That is not a chain itself. That is a kind of I guess I don't know exactly what it is. It's not a chain. It's a remnant from the existing condition survey, and I don't know if that is an old wall or anything like that. It's not a chain itself.
So it's just like debris.
It is, and I'm going to share my screen because I've got the aerial image, and that really shows where this piece is. So this is the image. Here's the house on the left. I'm going to zoom in, and I don't know how well it's going to go with the internet connection, but you can see this line of rocks that run down through here.
Yeah.
That's that line that kind of has the same call out as the chain. So if we look at where the new pier is going to go, it's going to be in roughly this location here, where that line is. Can everybody see that red line that I drew?
Yeah.
So that's the location of where the pier is going to go. We have the pier in here. About at the end of that red line is similar to where that float's going to sit into the side. So we can look at where that area is. You can see there's a dock to the north there, and it's tight inside off of that channel.
Can you also give me
that's an old rock wall area that I'm guessing is on that side.
I'm going to suggest to the board that we go back and review, as exciting as it sounds, go back and review the tapes of the hearings for the last submission. There was a lot of discussion about alternative sites. We really did work very hard to try and come up with an alternative to where this could go in, and there were a number of reasons why that would not work. I think it'd be useful to review those.
Well, this is a separate application.
I know, but there was discussion about the site itself because the board really did try to come up with alternatives.
So then if I could just conclude my thought on this, then as we were talking about the use of the dock, I think it would be useful to get a statement from the owner as to their intended use, because the reason I mention this is because it's hard for me to accept or think that a boat owner would allow his boat to sit on the mud unless the boat was specifically designed for that, for two reasons. One is, what if it's not muddy, it's rocky, and he gets a hole in the bottom of his boat? And the second is, what if the boat gets stuck? There's some kind of a, clay layer and it can't refloat the boat. So the so it would be really useful, I think, to get a statement of intended use from the owner about their plans to use the dock. And then we may turn that statement into a condition for the use of the dock, because, you know, if it's going to be for kayaks, okay, it's going to be like 6 hours a day where they can get some kayaks in and out. But if it's for a bigger boat, I mean, if it was my boat, I'd have a mooring somewhere else, and I would just bring it in, or have a little whaler go from the dock to out to the bigger boat. So it would be really useful, I think, for us to understand how the owners expect to use the dock, knowing that, and they need to know that that may turn into a condition in the finding of facts.
And who's going to police that?
Well, probably the owner. I mean, well, you know, I'm just thinking, you know, so, you know, you get this big boat out there and it's grounded and maybe it flips over or something. Nobody wants that to happen. So I still think it would be useful to get a statement of their intended use. I just don't see anybody bringing a big boat in there. It's too shallow. You know.
I agree. I think it's for smaller craft, and I will get that from. I'll work with the owners for that.
Yeah, I think it'd be really useful because, you know, there's an 11. Well, no, there's from the mud line to the highest the mean high water is only 4.5 feet. Well, what boat has a 4.5 foot draft? I mean, that's almost nothing.
Yep.
So, you know, to me, it seems that they're intentionally aiming this at smaller runabout type of vessels, kayaks, whatever, but no big boat's going to have a shallow enough draft to get in there. Still, I think it'd be useful to hear from the owners what they think they're going to do with it, knowing that they've only got 4 foot, you know, 5 feet of elevation of water depth at high tide. And of course, even at mean high water, it's less than that. It's, I don't know, 4.5 or something. And of course, that's almost instantaneous. So there's only going to be just a short window every day when they could get any kind of vessel in there, even a kayak.
Well, the question remains then, do we really have the authority to put a condition on the type of boat they can put on a dock? We're looking at putting in a dock, which basically could accommodate any kind of boat, because we have nothing in the land use ordinance that would allow us to make such a condition.
Well, the tidal variation may make that a moot point because it's such a shallow water depth. Still, it'd be useful to hear what they think they want to do with it.
Well, their motivation may be to increase the value of their house. They may never put a boat in there.
Yeah, I guess. But in a related thought, I think I remember last time hearing that there's some commercial dock that's available. I mean, it's accessible, not so far away in the same vicinity, right? As this proposed dock. Isn't there something nearby that we said was accessible last time?
Well, there are accessible places for big boats and accessible places for small boats. For example, down on Mill Road off North Street, I mean, there's a ramp to launch kayaks. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's a public kayak launching place. So, you know, there's that. And then you probably have various places throughout Kennebunkport and the Kennebunks to launch bigger boats. Mm-hmm. It depends on what you're putting in there.
Okay. Well, that's it. That's all my questions. So I look forward, but really, I guess the main thing is the float. Seeing how that actually could be made to work. Because
I'll work with the manufacturers and get that information.
And of course, the big thing is, I guess your mud mat's going to be steel plate or something. And of course, the bigger the mud mat, the heavier it becomes. So the bigger your float has to be.
Yep.
So at some point, you're going to have a gigantic float. Well, anyway, it's one of those iterative situations. Okay.
I think you're arguing yourself into a particular type of float there, Larry.
No, I'm just saying it's not very
Okay, does
obvious
any-
to me how it's going to work.
Okay. Anybody else with comments? Are there members of the public that want to speak? Please raise.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay.
Hi. Yeah, so we
Yourself,
are,
please, for the record.
yeah, so my name is Monica Keaty. We're part of a family of a budding property at 24 Bufflehead Lane. So we opposed this originally, and we still have concerns about this dock for the same reasons that have already been brought up. The concern of keeping the pristine nature of Turbot's Creek. That particular marshland that dock is being proposed on is the last really pristine marshland. Additionally, I still don't understand because the original proposal, they basically just ran out of room to put the dock in. It was going to have to sit on the marsh to be functional, to be within the code. So I understand that now you've got these moving parts, and I also have that concern that if it's going to be a little bit longer, more into the marsh at high tide, so that it kind of, it's not like the land got any shorter. So I don't really, technically understand how the dock now fits, although I get that it's meeting more guidelines. In addition, let me just look at my notes here. We've seen the destructiveness. There's been a boat that was on the marsh that's in the middle, and it was just a whaler, and it just has really taken out so much of that marsh because it was sitting on the mud, and over time, we just saw that marshland get really chipped away. So we are concerned about a similar thing happening on this side. And let me just continue looking at my notes. Yeah, and the size of the boat definitely is a concern for us. And as you've mentioned, it probably can't be too big because it's more shallow on that side. But yeah, we would just like to, at the end of the day, just clarify: is it going to stay within those guidelines that are set? Or is it somehow going to start to float out and become longer than it should be? And again, the sinking, the erosion is a big concern. So the weight that has been brought up, we are definitely concerned about that. And I think that's it. Yeah, we just would appreciate, looking at why this was denied initially and seeing how much different it is from the first time to this time. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I want to first off thank the
Well, thank you for the
board. Pardon me?
Okay.
Hello? I want to thank the planning board for the hard work of balancing, preserving this beautiful town in Turbot's Creek against development needs and pressures. It's not an easy endeavor. And in that context, I offer the following comments, which were submitted in writing to Lisa Harmon. I would like to express opposition to proposal 190401 from the Henry Family Trust regarding a dock and related structure. Can you hear me? I'm hearing some echoing as I'm trying to speak.
We can hear you. I think Nina may be asking you to introduce yourself first.
Okay, sorry. My name is Molly Ruggles.
I can hear,
Okay, very good, thank you.
yes.
My sisters and I own the summer cottage at 74 Turbot's Creek Road. We also have a small cottage which we leave open for our neighbors and others to use to store kayaks and other boating equipment. And we spend many summer hours enjoying the creek, paddling, rowing, swimming, walking the creek at low tide, as well as using a small motorboat. We have observed that this area is a much valued public boat launch, and it's in almost constant use on summer weekends. We feel that Turbot's Creek is a gateway out to Cape Porpoise Harbor, and it's also the access point to Vaughn's Island, where the land is conserved for camping and day use. And we believe that the time has come to stop any new docks or related structures on Turbot's Creek. Since 1985, when our family first came to Turbot's Creek, we've watched the salt marshes erode, the cove collect silt, and the navigable channel become more crowded. It's a special place with a public launch and a preserved tidal island, and it needs to remain as natural as possible. And it really is a resource for the community, for visitors, for people from Kennebunkport and the surrounding area. So we feel that this project, Proposal 190401, would negatively impact the shoreland resource protection zones in and around Turbot's Creek. Climate change is bringing more storm surges, flooding, torrential rains, and land use decisions need to reflect our understanding of those trends. This means being more cautious and protective than we might have been in the past. We understand that the proposal has been adjusted from what was submitted last year to comply with more ordinances. But we want to urge the planning board to look beyond the question of specific compliance and to consider the future of Turbot's Creek. Adding another dock on the creek will create more congestion and further change the natural character of this beautiful area. At some point, the town must decide that further building on the creek and along its shores is unsustainable. And it's always difficult for a planning board to decide when such a point has been reached, but we believe that the point has arrived for Turbot's Creek, and we hope that you will act accordingly by denying this application. And just a few last words. I just want to say that many neighbors have an interest in stopping any more building on Turbot's Creek, and should the board be willing to turn its attention in that direction, we would be interested to help and participate. I'm submitting this on behalf of myself, Molly Ruggles, my sisters Dee Dee and Rebecca, and my father, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make one comment on that, and that you're asking the planning board to, in some ways, to make decisions that are really up to the Board of Selectmen and the town, to stop building, to stop any and all docks. That really is a decision that lies with the Board of Selectmen, not with the planning board. The planning board carries out the ordinances, basically, that the town votes on, and they come up through the Board of Selectmen. So
Thank you for that information.
Yeah, you might want to direct that sort of request to the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Okay. If there are no more hands raised, then I'm going to basically stop here and continue the public hearing until the next planning board meeting to allow for revisions from Jeff. And we may have a fuller board then. They may have more comments as well. And so in the interest of fairness for that and for any other public that want to speak, we decided for some of these applications that are more complicated for the planning board to continue a public hearing at least through 2 sessions. So, okay. And if that's the case, then I'll go on to item number 2, which is the Boughton Hotel Corporation. doing business as the Colony Hotel. And this particular application involves the North Campus. And is Mr. Walsh available for a description of what's happening there? If you take down Jeff and Amy and bring up Mr. Walsh.
Actually, we also represent Boughton Hotel.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
actually on all of the agenda items today, so
Oh my
I
God.
apologize.
No, lovely to have you. Okay, well,
No wonder Ralph took the evening off.
Yeah, right.
here forever then.
Good evening. Can I respectfully ask a few other people be added in here? It would be John Martin, the owner, Silas Canavan, Rob Harbison, who's the architect, and Michael Murphy, who is also an architect.
Yes, if you could promote those people, please.
That's great. Thank you. Rob Harbison. That's great. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, as you said, I'm Bill Walsh with Walsh Engineering, and I'm here with John Martin, one of the partners of Boughton Hotels, and Silas Canavan from Walsh Engineering, Rob Harbison of Market Square Architects, and Michael Murphy, also of Market Square Architects. It's been a while since we've been in front of you, and basically we're here to sort of give you an update on what's been happening, where we've been over the past few months, and would like to just go through some of the changes that we have in front of you. We have, I'll let John take over, but we've basically, he's hired Wright Ryan Architects, and I'll let him address a little bit of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the board. I'll try to keep this as short as possible. Again, my name is John Martin. I'm managing partner and 1/3 owner of the Colony Hotel, Boughton Hotel Corporation. You know Bill Walsh from Walsh Engineering. Silas, he's introduced everybody on the team so far. And a couple things have happened since the last time we've been in front of you. We interviewed lots of contractors in the area, management, contracting teams, and we decided to go with Wright Ryan. Many of you on the board may know Wright Ryan. They actually did part of the police station renovation for you a few years ago. Maine-based company. We're really happy to be working with them. We're also really happy to keep Walsh Engineering. Silas and Bill are on the call tonight. They've been involved with this project since the very beginning, so they know it very well. And we're really happy to introduce Rob and Mark from Market Square Architects, who are going to be giving you guys a lot more details about what's coming in the future. I'm going to talk just briefly about some of the stuff that we are working with the selectmen on, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Bill. We went to the selectmen on your recommendation because we're requesting some use basically in the right-of-way of the town, most specifically lighting, some parking, a stone entrance column, and some sidewalks. We wanted to get you guys all updated, men and women, I should say, with the board updated on the fact that we did get some answers from the selectmen and some feedback. The first being on the lighting. They were opposed to lighting on Colony Ave, so we've withdrawn that from our planning. They had some concerns with parking that was going to be in the right of the way. We've actually, and we'll speak about this later, reduced our parking because we've reduced our room count substantially so that we'll no longer need that. The stone walls are still under review. They're not really walls per se, but they're mirror images of the columns you're probably familiar with seeing at the Colony when you drive in with the posts on top, really more to identify the turn than anything else. And we're still waiting for review on that from the selectmen. But lastly, the sidewalks. The sidewalks, we are getting some pushback from the selectmen. We understand their concerns and we're trying to work through that with them. We think it's an integral part of this project. We think that Colony Ave could use a safer egress for people from South Main Street to Ocean Ave. We also think that it would be a vast improvement to the conditions that are existing currently. If any of the planning board wants to give a tap on the shoulder to a selectman, and if you are in favor or opposed, we'd love to have you guys give that feedback to the selectmen. They seem to think that it's not necessarily an improvement to that area. We are going to go back in front of the selectmen on the 13th. So we should have answers for you basically in regards to the entrance walls and the sidewalks. All the other things I think we've cleaned up either by removing or by working with Warner, the town, and the selectmen. I'm happy to answer any questions about those. I'm also happy to turn this right over to Bill and let him pick it up and run with it. I don't know if anyone has questions now. We're also going to take questions at the end, whatever works for you guys. We're happy.
John, could you elaborate on what the concern is from whoever you've spoken with in the town about sidewalks? Is it, you asking the town to pay for it? Is that what's going on? Or?
No, not at all. We're prepared to pay for that. What we're hearing is that they're trying to identify the benefit to the town, I think, and there is some concerns that people on the selectmen don't believe that that is a road that's utilized by people who walk. They can't see the benefit to the town. They think it's more of a benefit to the colony. We're trying to prove to them otherwise. We think that Colony Ave would be well served to have better egress to Ocean Ave. We think the town in general would be served better with more walking facilities. We encourage our guests, as do we encourage our neighbors, to walk around the neighborhood. We also feel like this end of town is getting more and more busy, as is all of Kennebunkport. So the more legs we can put on the street and less cars, I think we'll be doing much better. But that's basically, Ed, what they're telling us is that they're trying to find the justification as a benefit for the town, but it is something that we are including in our development, in our cost.
Not to belabor it, John, but I still don't understand. So Colony says, hey, we'd like to pay for and install, and is the town concerned that there's a maintenance cost?
I think there is some concern. I think Warner's was in on some of those meetings. I don't know, Warner, if you want to chime in. I think maintenance is some of the future. To be specific about the sidewalk and not to get too detailed on it is that we're not proposing a brick sidewalk or anything to elaborate. It would be very similar to the sidewalk the Colony built on Ocean Avenue. It would be a granite curb with a brushed concrete surface. So we would try to minimize the maintenance in the future because we do know that's a concern for the town and we're very sensitive to that. Warner, I don't know if you want to chime in or.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm happy to, give some feedback to that piece. As you all know, the Board of Selectmen, they have been, concerned over the past number of years, in regards to, the increase of streets that we have, just for example, that, have come to the town that have been requesting to become public, to the point where, and we've discussed this here at the Planning Board that, there's recommendations that the board, that the Planning Board now makes to the Board of Selectmen as to whether or not there's a considered public benefit. And I do believe that a lot of that concern is just in, keeping track of, what and how many public improvements that we have relative to maintenance, maintenance, upkeep, and potential future capital improvement costs. So, to answer your question, I do think it is a question of maintenance, repair, and potential replacement. We've had a number of instances in the recent past here where there have been some sidewalk issues relative to replacement, whether or not it was a town issue, whether or not it was private issue. There were some improvements that had been constructed in the public right of way that ended their, that came to the end of their, I would say their functional life, and had some safety issues. So, I think there's just some sensitivity right now surrounding, some of these types of improvements. As John stated, I do think it's important that, if there are folks that, that want to weigh in, regarding, the public use of this area, I do think that type of feedback, would be helpful to the board. That's the Board of Selectmen.
Understood. Thank you. Very helpful. Sounds like there's not a fundamental objection to it, but there's a concern that we don't go fund and then go maintain what is essentially a private road that is public by its history.
Right. We'd be happy to take it over. You want to make it our road, we'll take it over anytime now. So, but yeah, it is still public access. So we have to go through you guys and the town, and we want to be respectful of everyone's opinion. So we're just dotting all the I's and crossing the T's. So before I go any further, I mean, I'd rather give you over to Bill and Silas. They're going to be way more exciting than me. They have drawings and things they can share screens on and talk about things like, drainage and fun stuff like that. So Bill, you want to pick this up?
Well, before you do that, I have a question on whether something was taken up or not. Warner, you might want to weigh in on this. I believe we had a question of whether the planning board could approve something that would take 5 years to complete. Did that question come up before the Board of Selectmen?
I mean, that isn't something that would necessarily come up in front of the Board of Selectmen. As you know, the time frames and the calendars are something that we're working on, that are within the land use ordinance. I believe Ralph Austin, was working alongside with Bill on the establishment of a clear timeline, so that we could include, permit deadlines. The end result is that what we want to see is a timeline that shows a planning board approval, that shows when permits would be issued and what the time frames, would be, relative to that, relative to those expirations. And I would say that conceptually that, that those worked. However, there's a bit more detail that needs to be fleshed out. And I think now that the colony has their construction team assembled, I think, it will help us to get into, the reality of the construction world as opposed to the hypothetical, which is really where we were at.
Is that something that the planning board will need to detail in findings of fact?
Yes, I do think it's just it's something that needs to be addressed, that, it just needs to be acknowledged. I would like to at least have it something be acknowledged by the board, in terms of the timelines. I just want it to be clear that, whenever we're dealing with a project that spans multiple years, that, that there's no question, as to the validity of, the timeline of the project.
Okay.
That wouldn't necessarily preclude that baseline plan being updated 3 years into the project, but it would be in fact a baseline that could be managed and
That's right.
on the same page.
Yep.
Now, I would say that we're really excited about Ryan is putting together a great timeline. We met earlier this week. Warner is going to be in the loop on that the whole time. So then the application will be returning with you. We'll have far more details than the one you've had in the past.
Good.
Yes, yeah, and we'll have no problem, I think, supplying that timeline to the board for review. We certainly figured out a way in which it can come together and meet the requirements. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is a continued public hearing, so why don't you go ahead and describe the update?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. So we have been working with Ryan, Rob, and Mike. The buildings themselves and the architecture of the buildings, if you recall back to when what was submitted before was more sort of hand-drawn sketches, and they have taken those buildings and made them more what we call construction documents. So when we do that, certain things start to flesh themselves out, exact grades of doors and elevations of a bottom floor and a top floor. So all of that stuff has been in the works as we've been going through this. And it's sort of just generally, I'll say, we fine-tune the grading plan on the site with the design of the buildings, which is the way that has to come together. On top of that, what John talked about, I'm going to switch quickly to, this was the plan that you saw before, and we're on the north side here. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so everybody can see that. So this was the original plan. John talked a little bit about the parking. We had some parking that went over the edge here. We had some retaining walls and a dumpster pad here. A lot of those things have been changed and updated. As you can see, this parking lot has been pulled within the right-of-way line. This is the right-of-way here. This is the other right-of-way of Ocean Avenue. So we've pulled, this parking lot has changed quite a bit from what we had before. We have added some more retaining wall to come down and around. This all is within the Colony property. It's at the edge of it, but it is within the Colony property where that retaining wall will be. So we've tried to keep outside of the right-of-way and make sure that those work properly. We have taken sewer. This red line right here is the sewer line. Previously, we had it out in the front here, and it came down to Colony Ave and into this system, and we took it out the backside, and we did that for two reasons. One was ledge. We do have ledge on this site kind of throughout, and as we looked at it a little harder, a little deeper, we figured out that there's less ledge on the backside of this, and we can bring it down into Ocean Avenue. One of the benefits of that is that some of the existing structures that are in this area right now that discharge into the sewer system and go down to a pump station, they go down to a pump station off to our right, and they pump back up into this system, into this manhole right here, and then flow gravity back down. By doing this and switching this around, we're taking the flow away from that pump station, which we talked with the sewer department about, and they seemed excited about that. That pump station is I guess, on the smaller side, so being able to take those flows away and simply put them by gravity down Ocean Avenue was a much better choice. We've looked at electrical systems. We've actually had CMP out on the site, so Ryan has helped us get CMP out here. What you see in this very light green is overhead. I think previously we were looking at dropping it underground back here and coming all the way through the site with underground power. What we found as this was looked at a little harder was there's a CMP pole right here, which sends electrical service down this way. It also goes across the street. This pole is pretty significant in its electrical capacity and what is on it. So taking it underground was not as simple as we might have thought originally. So what we're proposing is to keep this system overhead to this point in Ocean Avenue, and then where it turns to dark green, this would be the underground electrical system that we're proposing to come along here and back over to the other side of Colony Avenue. Over here, it will pop back up ground and connect back into the existing overhead system. I think one other item, we reduced some parking spaces. We haven't submitted to you with this submission the final parking counts, but we will do that moving forward. The reason is that the final room counts are just being finalized now by the architect, so we want to make sure those two jive and come together, both our room counts and our parking. As it turns out, the number of rooms is actually reducing from what we had thought we were doing before. So when we started putting actual footprints into these, or hotel rooms into these buildings, the actual number of rooms is going down. With that, I think that is the major part of the utilities. We have had a traffic report that has been drafted, and there was no substantial issues found with that, but that again is also tied into the number of rooms. So once we get these rooms numbers finalized, those numbers will also jive, and with our next submission, we will bring that forward with the traffic information. With that, I'm going to turn it really quick over to Silas to talk about let me get my screen back here. I'm going to turn it back over to Silas to talk about stormwater.
Right. Thank you, Bill. Silas Canavan with Walsh Engineering, another one of the design engineers on the project. I'm going to share my screen here as well. 1 second. All right. Is everybody seeing the plan that's up on the screen now? All right. So if you remember from the last meeting, we had a discussion about stormwater, and there was a request from, I believe, multiple board members to try to provide some additional stormwater treatment that was sort of above and beyond. There is no stormwater treatment out there now, and we are maintaining the same impervious area on site. However, you know, we took that comment to heart, and what we've done is we've added a stormwater treatment system. If you can see my hand down in this corner near the creek, which is where all the stormwater that's collected from the parking lots is directed. Next plan here is a blow up of that area. I'll zoom in just a little bit more. So the system that we decided to use is called a focal point biofiltration system. And what that is it's sort of a combination between natural stormwater treatment from vegetation growing within the basin, but it's also got a filtration aspect to it as well. And it uses a higher, an engineered media that has a higher flow rate that allows you to reduce the footprint of what would typically be required from, I'd say, sort of a standard main DEP stormwater treatment, BMP. You can see the sort of the hatched area in here. That would be sort of a mulch surface that would be completely or very well vegetated. And then the grid area, if you can see that, those are actually chambers that are down below ground. You can't see them when it's built, but they hold additional stormwater down below. And those are actually wrapped in a fabric, and they provide additional filtration from the water after it's gone through the soil media. And then it will outlet to the creek from there. So we've designed this system to basically treat most of the parking lots on the site. I'll show you, this is a detail here of this stormwater system. This is a cross section over here, so you can sort of get an idea of what it looks like. You'll have ponded water that flows into the system. It filters through this media. We're not really showing it, but there are plants here. It's not just grass. And I'll show you a photo in a second of some representative images. And then you can see there's a chamber system down below here, and then that outlets to the creek. And there's an overflow system for larger storms as well. These are just some representative images of this type of stormwater system, just so you can kind of get a sense of what it'll actually look like. You can see very well vegetated. This is sort of another style, but the same system here. So anyway, it becomes a small depression in the ground, but it's very effective at treating stormwater. This plan, I think, is probably the most important one to show everybody right now. What's being treated by that area is actually everything that's shown in green here. So we went from not providing any treatment for any runoff on the site to treating basically all of the reconstructed impervious parking lots, with the exception of the one adjacent to Ocean Ave, just because elevations don't allow. And also the front half. I just
want to ask and point out that this is applying to the South Campus as well, yes?
The stormwater piece does apply to both, yes. The stormwater is integral to both sides, so yes, it does apply to both. So anyway, in the end, we've really captured nearly 2 acres of impervious area, and I believe an additional acre of landscaped area throughout the site. So we believe that this is a significant improvement from what was being proposed before, and you know, we hope the board would agree with that as well.
Alice, what occupies that piece of land right now that's going to be replaced with the stormwater?
It's actually the end of the Fontenay hotel, whatever you want to call it. That actually goes down to right about here. So most of that is actually under what is now the Fontenay Terrace, I think it's called. And then immediately adjacent to that, I think it's parking lot.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so it's all, pretty, already developed area.
Got it. Thank you.
That's kind of the update on where we're headed with stormwater. We haven't finalized this design yet. We will be submitting our stormwater application to the Maine DEP as well. And they will review all of this as well will the peer review engineer for our town of Kennebunkport.
So Silas, this is Larry Simmons. So all of the stormwater from those green colored areas are going to flow through your treatment system. And so when you say treated, is that like solids removal, or are you going to have some active biological process going on?
So there's both in this type of situation. So it really almost creates kind of like a wetland. It's not technically like a gravel wetland like you can use in some cases, but I think if I showed you, these images here showing how they're pretty well vegetated. So, the plants are the manufacturer recommends some specific plants, that can withstand some inundation of water temporarily. But they're also good at sucking up the pollutants from the stormwater itself. And there's also a filtration capacity, a filtration aspect of this as well that will filter out the suspended solids from the stormwater prior to outletting to the creek.
Okay, so do you anticipate a need for periodically removing the solids that have been settled out? Is there a maintenance aspect to this that could impact it?
Yep, so the chamber system down below, actually you're able to access that from a manhole usually. And that can be cleaned out. It actually rarely has to be. If most of the sediment will actually accumulate primarily on the top. So you would sometimes, if it was to clog, you could scrape the the top 6 inches off or whatever and replace that top material. These type of systems do typically you would have a stormwater maintenance agreement so that somebody is checking these probably every 6 months in this case, and then identifying if there is maintenance that's required, and obviously that would have to happen at that time.
Okay, great.
It's pretty common for us, Larry, that we do a lot of these inspections on systems like this. So DEP usually requires us to monitor these on behalf of the client.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Unless there are any other questions on stormwater, I think I'll probably turn it over to Rob and Mike to talk a little bit about the buildings. And Rob, Mike, do you want me to put the plan up, or do you guys want to put it up yourself?
If you could put it up, that would be great. My name is Rob Hardison. I'm one of the principals of Market Square Architects. We're located in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I've been working in the seacoast north of Boston for the last 20 years or so. And we're kind of picking up where Windover development left off, I think you met with last time. And really, we're not changing a whole lot aesthetically from where they started. They took it to a concept level, and we were selected as part of a design build team with Wright Ryan. And so along with that, we've also got structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, interior designers. We've got a whole team. And I think the benefit and value of having that at this phase is we're really able to work with Bill and Silas and John and figure out these buildings in a very detailed way. And so even a lot of the conversations about things like parking and grading and utilities has to do with making sure that those things are coming into the building in an appropriate way. So we're basically picking up where Windover left off, and we're making it more real so that it can be buildable. Making sure that building heights and roof pitches fit within allowable, that the footprint is within allowable, and we're working with Bill and Silas for all of that. So we're hoping that what you'll find is that aesthetically, it's very similar to what you've seen before, just a little bit more developed, and it will continue to get a little more detailed as we go forward. As we get later to the final submission, we'll also have some prettier pictures with some color, but essentially we're trying to design it as much as possible within keeping with the existing property. So white traditional siding, very traditional regional detailing, red shingle roof. I think things that you're familiar with seeing at the Colony Hotel. Right now we're focused on buildings 1 and 2. for the North Campus submission. And that's really where we've spent the bulk of our time developing the structures. We've at a concept level, we've developed buildings 3 and 4, but that's just from a timing standpoint, a little bit behind. So this is the center element, the center entry point of building 1. And then Silas, if you want to maybe go to the next page. And these are the 2 wings. That building is just too long to show on one sheet, but the 2 wings on either side are symmetrical. So those are the extents of building 1.
Can you tell us why the number of rooms are reduced?
Well, I think part of that is anytime an architect or the designer works on a concept level, you're trying to approximately fit rectangles, but you don't really know yet exactly how you're going to design those rooms and what the layout's going to be, and what kind of furniture you want to have in there, and what size shower or bathroom. And then also we're trying to fit these things under roof and make sure that they fit with egress stairs. And so as you get more detailed, you start to flush out exactly the number of rooms. And so I think what we found when we got into the drawings was that, Windover did a great job massing out at a concept level. But I think once we started making it real, making those rooms real, we just couldn't fit the same number that they had. And so it just subtracted on the basis of that.
Okay.
And just to remind everyone, Nina, historically this is 2 years ago, when we were first coming up with this idea, we submitted a plan that had a range of rooms because we weren't sure of the building sizes. And what we were encouraged to do was to apply to the maximum we could put in. So we only knew we were coming down from those numbers. And now Market Square has done a great job at really dialing in those room sizes, and we're getting to what the real number is. But it was getting confusing. If you remember a bunch of years ago, we said we could do anything between 40 and 60 rooms. And you guys were like, give us a number. So we went with a max, and we're only going to come down from that. We're not going to go ever above that.
Okay, well, I was just curious. But you also remember when we talked that I talked about, especially on the creek side, having bird-friendly designs and bird-friendly windows?
Yes, definitely. We brought that up with Rob and Market Square. They're aware of your concerns, and we talked about it quite a bit.
Good.
Yeah, I think that's important to us. And actually, one of the first things John spoke to us about, even before we were hired, is really providing access to the visibility on that side of nature for the guests as well as the public that walk through the property. And so I think that's something that's been highlighted very much from the beginning by John.
Oh, good, because there's nothing worse than going through sliding doors and seeing dead birds in front of you out on the outside.
Absolutely. No, and I think, where we've got most of the rooms facing that side actually have Juliet balconies or actual balconies where you can view that. So we definitely want to have the value of that natural element be a focal point.
Good.
I think another important part to point out here is that really our footprints haven't changed from, not significantly. They might by a foot or so here or there, but we've been on our volume calculations and our floor area calculations. We're going to bring those numbers back to you with these designs to prove that out, that we're still within our
and we've been
limits.
Monitoring that with Silas on a bi-weekly basis along the way to make sure we're not getting ourselves into trouble. So, and then this is building to the marketplace building. So you notice on the right-hand side of that top image and the left-hand side of the bottom image, that's that grade change that we're talking about from sort of the marketplace entry and then to that upper parking lot where you access the rooms above. So the bottom of the sheet, that's the side that faces the creek. And the top of the sheet, that's the side that faces Ocean Ave. But again, very much in keeping with, I think, aesthetically what the Colony Hotel is and the early concept drawings you saw some Windover previously.
Okay, also aesthetically, have you had a chance to talk to the Shade Tree Committee? John Ripton is the tree warden, about your plantings. And I know we work with Noah Tucker at Bartlett, and he's an arborist. And for the type of landscape that you have and the fact that you get winds off the ocean and you've got the creek there. Just go over and kind of sure that your plantings will work there.
So I think Bill or John, maybe you want to comment on that. One thing I will, I guess, say real quickly is just that we do have a landscape architect who is just getting up to speed on the project and actually met on site with Bill and John and Silas earlier this week. And I think that will be coming in due process, but I think Bill and Silas, do you want to comment on that further?
Yeah, absolutely. We did. So we have brought in Emma Kelly, who's a landscape architect, and Emma is very familiar with Maine and the plantings here. And we talked very much about the natural and native species that we will need and be required to put in here. So she's very, very up to speed, I think, so far on what we're looking for and what we want to do and what John wants to accomplish. So
yes, and we also had a meeting with Wright Ryan and our potential bidders for the site work, and we were identifying trees and starting to take an inventory and getting really sensitive to what's existing and what we're going to be able to keep all the natural trees that are back there as much as possible. So we're already marking and thinking about how the site is going to be impacted and how we can continue to maintain what's there, especially along the shoreline.
yes.
And otherwise, I just real quickly, I'll introduce Mike Murphy, who's part of our team. He's managing this project for us, and you may at some point also see John Ramsey from our office who's supporting the project. So we'll become familiar faces, I hope, as we go through this. And then lastly, I'm just really happy that I wore this vest, that I didn't exactly match Werner. It would have been really embarrassing otherwise.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. So I think with that, if willing to answer any more questions that the board may have, I think our purpose of this really was to bring you back up to speed. We hadn't seen you in a while, bring you back up to speed, and I think we're planning on coming back to you in June with an updated submission. So we've got a lot of balls up in the air that we're sort of juggling through right now and getting these, from my perspective, we're fine tuning these and getting them in a much better place, which makes me happy as an engineer because I need that. So we're getting those finer details taken care of with Rob and Mike and making everything come together and work really well. So we do, as John said, we do have a meeting with selectmen next week. We're hoping we can forward that discussion, and that we kind of need that, I think, to come back to you as well. So our overall plan is, I think, to get a submission back into you in June and get back in front of you just as quickly.
And our office and Wright Ryan are also meeting with inspection, fire, state fire marshal's office, double checking accessibility, really so that we can dot our I's and cross our T's and not need to come back for those administrative things either for modifications. We're trying to get it right the first time.
Exactly.
Okay. Board members have questions? Oh, Larry. Ed? George? Okay. George? George
No.
still there?
I'm still here. I was on mute.
Okay. All right. Then if there are no other questions, then this is a public hearing, so I'll open it up to the public. Are there any members of the public out there that have their hands up? Okay. Would you identify yourself fully, please?
Yes, David Strawn. We live up on Spring Valley Road, number 7 and 6 on Spring Valley Road. We travel Colony Avenue on a day-to-day basis during the summer and periodically during the winter. Also South Main Street. Both of these streets seem to be that they'll be greatly impacted by this project. So can you answer a couple of questions? First question is for how long will Colony Avenue be out of commission during this project?
I can try to answer that, David. So John and Martin again. Right now, we're still working on the build schedule. I think, David, one thing to point out that maybe is important for everyone to remember is that part of the reason why this build is so long is that we're going to shut down construction during the summer months. So it will not be impacting any egress of the road or you or even the town from probably, I would say, mid to late May into September, October. We want to avoid that at all costs. This could be built in a couple of years, but we're really pushing that out so we impact the neighborhood as little as possible. The only time we really foresee Colony Ave being shut down is when we have actually some excavation or things going on there, but we're really doing a minimal amount of impact on that. We'll have way better information once we have the schedule from Widen, and I'm more than happy to share that with you anytime once I have it, if that answers your question. I don't know.
Yes, it does. Can you also...
If I can just add to that real quick. So just to give everybody an idea of where we're at, on buildings 1 and 2, we're at what we would call a design development set, which basically means halfway through the drawings that we're going to get to do permit. And that's usually enough that we can work with Ryan to get one, a loose schedule and also a budget. So that's kind of where we're at. One thing that we also talked about quite a bit from the interview on with John is I think as we go forward, we will be offering meetings with abutters to talk about what they can expect for construction, timing, and all of those things. So as that information becomes available, which I think the first blush of that is in process right now, that'll absolutely be something that we will try to engage the community of our neighbors with.
Okay, thank you. Can you also talk about on Colony Avenue, is there a plan to widen it or to change the current grade? It's right now, as you know, it's not lined for two-way traffic. You're adding considerable amount of traffic here. And while the number of guest rooms may not be increasing all that much, while you have a market there, you're going to have more traffic at different times of the day. Usually that area gets pretty quiet around 5 o'clock or so. It looks like based on what you're trying to propose there, you're trying to make that more of a, bring more of an evening element to that. And therefore there would need to be more lighting. The road itself should be lined for two-way traffic, which it doesn't have the capacity right now for real two-way traffic. So is your plan to widen that road or lower the grade because you go up and over kind of a hill there? What's the plan there?
Well, David, good question. First of all, let's start with the market because that's where you started. Our intention is for the market to be a sort of a combination of a grab and go, more like a coffee luncheon place. We are not anticipating having any evening activity going on down there is the first answer. We don't want the noise, we don't want the headache, and we have guests staying above that market. So that's part of it. The other half of it is really what happens to the road is a little bit out of our hands at this point. And we are proposing, and we would welcome your feedback when we finally do go in front of the selectmen, but we are proposing, and I use that word strongly because they can shut it down, but taking a little bit of the hump out of Colony Ave and straightening it slightly, and we're requesting to put in a sidewalk, all of which, and we requested lighting, but that's been removed at the encouragement of the selectmen. So I feel like I don't have answers for you because I don't have answers for me, David. So
okay, well, at least you've stated what you're trying to improve that road and like you said, straighten it and maybe reduce the hump to it, which is a problem on sight lines, obviously. The next question is related to when that road is closed for whatever you're doing whether it's off season, whenever. That's going to push a tremendous amount of any traffic on that road probably onto South Main Street. And South Main Street, John, as you probably are aware, is extremely, extremely treacherous. That road needs to be improved. And does the colony have any intention on pushing for that as part of this plan? Because, like again, the increased traffic is going to be based on the Colony project and Colony Avenue being unaccessible. And that road is just waiting for a death to happen.
I agree, David. South Main Street is a problem. Unfortunately, it doesn't fall within the purview of what we're doing. And we would anticipate that the traffic relocation we would just be pushing people in another direction, not necessarily from Ocean Ave onto South Main. It would be more like continuing on in the route they're already traveling, but it would be for a minimal and only when we're bringing product in and out. We're not anticipating shutting down, let's say Colony Ave and taking Arlington Ave and pushing it up South Main. But David, I had a close call the other day leaving work on South Main with a landscape truck and a lady with 4 dogs, and it was scary, and I was going 25 miles an hour. So I agree with you. South Main Street needs to be addressed. Unfortunately, not, I got to stay in my lane on this one and stay.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's helpful, John. Thank you. My final question is related, I think, go over to Silas on the sewer side of the thing. You've got this plan. How does that impact the creek back there? That's you're setting up all these beautiful views of the beautiful creek, but you're also setting up a sewage plant there that potentially could affect the creek back there.
I think you might be referring to the stormwater system.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay, so it's not sewer. I just want to be very clear that we're not directing any sewer into the creek. So all the stormwater is currently running, into the creek now. We happen to be directing it to, through a pipe system into this treatment system, which really is not that big. I don't know the exact dimensions of it off the top of my head, but we can certainly provide that. But really, this just kind of looks like a small depression in the ground. As you're looking back from the creek, you really won't even see the depression or the ponded water in there at all, really, because you'll be sort of looking at the slope in front of it, and it'll be depressed below the top of the slope. You might see it as you're looking out of buildings 1 and 2, as you're looking out towards the creek, but again, it's going to look really more like a wetland. It only holds water for 24 to 48 hours, and then it basically drains dry. And so it really, they end up being more of a landscape feature on the site. With well selected plants, it should not be a detriment to the.
What happens in the winter time when that area freezes in the winter? Will that area freeze?
It could, but what we find is that the stormwater tends to, the stormwater is not frozen, so the stormwater generally still tends to filter through. It warms up the filtration media. It is also, it does have an overflow built into it. So if for whatever reason it did freeze in very deep freeze conditions, it would still be controlled in outlets in a controlled condition out to the creek. And there's a stabilized riprap apron that we're proposing at the outlet that'll prevent erosion.
And I think it's important to note too that the treatment system is actually going to improve the stormwater that flows to there now. That system does not exist. So it is an improvement upon what's there now.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, are there other members of the public that want to comment or ask questions? Okay, well, at this, go ahead.
I'd also just like to note here, just so that the board is aware, is that the water district is also working alongside this project. The water main, that runs up through Colony, I believe is from the 20s. And so as part of the timing of this project, the water district is also going to be doing a water main replacement up through there as well.
That's a good point, Werner. We are sort of working with the water district to partner with them to time the construction accordingly, so that we're not redoing Colony Ave and also redoing the water main at 2 different times. We're going to try to do that together. So, important point. Thank you.
So Werner, to that point, it sounds like it was done in the same era as the Wiles District water main that was just redone past year or 2.
Right.
I'm hearing blasting will be involved if it was anything like the Wiles District, though. They basically tried to weave their way through the least ledge, and the more modern method is to go more direct.
Yeah, that was definitely something that we saw with the Wilds District, main replacement. As you noted there, for sure, there was, the original main. They just, kind of found the cracks and the depressions amongst the ledge, and that's kind of how they just weaved a water main through. And so, today's standards obviously require, a much larger trench for water mains to be placed in. And, I don't want to speak for the district, but I do suspect that there'll be some ledge removal as part of that.
So to the question earlier, that is the type of thing that probably will cause some road closures. Again, pick your best month, but it needs to be when the ground isn't frozen. And one thing that reminded me of, though, is that the last time we spoke at length about the colony and the traffic study that I understand is imminent was the request that it perhaps could consider the increased traffic during construction, due to road closures, but also due to the increase in construction vehicles and the like, that'll all be using South Main Street. So, and the dangerous situation that could occur, whether or not any special treatment needs to be done, anticipating a problem.
Yeah, we have talked about that, Ed, with Wright Ryan, and we have made it very clear that traffic has to be directed towards Ocean. It can't go down South Main Street. So that's going to be a requirement of the contractor not to send construction traffic in that direction.
Yeah, that'll be a tough one. That a lot of everybody who's local knows that that's the way around the Ocean Avenue.
Yeah, I think fortunately, construction is going to be in the winter months, so that's a positive from the construction standpoint. Another point I guess I'd like to make on Colony is that it was sort of intimated that maybe we're closing that down. I'm not sure we're going to be able to. I mean, we need to provide emergency and fire access on that street, at all times, because they need to get the hotel, they need to get the residents behind there. So I don't know the details of it, but I do suspect there will be some temporary roads bypasses that might be done as they're doing that. Will it be closed when they're blasting? Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm certain that Wright Ryan will be putting together a construction management plan with the town to go through these things. This project is going to have a lot of logistics to it, and it's going to include things like, the time of day that they're allowed to do work so they don't disturb neighbors, where construction dumpsters will sit. So, and that's exactly why John and his group brought in the entire team now, so we can figure out these things. There's a lot of moving parts to a project of this size, and Wright Ryan is about as organized a company as I've ever worked with. Certainly one of the best in Maine at managing those things, and that's why we've got their pre-construction folks working with us now to map out those logistics.
I think you've done a good job articulating the capacity of the team that you've brought to bear and understand the importance of it. There's no doubt in my mind that a year or two into this, there'll have been some lessons learned. And even if you were doing it perfectly up front, conditions are going to change, but that you're treating it as the problem that it deserves.
We're certainly trying to, that's for sure.
No, it's coming across. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Those of us who live on South Main Street are a cranky bunch anyway.
That's a fact, Jack.
This summer you can go over to Colony for a drink and you'll relax a little.
I can't walk over there. I can't bring my 8 dogs.
Tell the selectmen you want a sidewalk.
The wrong side of the street. What is going on with that? Sorry.
Are there any other comments from the board? Okay, if there are no other comments from the public or from the board, then it's nice to have the update and appreciate it. And I know Wright Ryan, they're a very good bunch. They've worked on my house several times. So I will continue the public hearing until you come back again. I assume that will be within a couple of months, maybe even less, hopefully. And I'm going to basically continue that, and we're going to go on to item number 3, which again brings up Boughton Hotel Corporation doing business as the Colony Hotel with Walsh as the authorized agent. Only this is pertaining to the South Campus. Do we have an update there?
We do. Thank you. Again, Bill Walsh, Walsh Engineering, with John Martin and the crew that you just heard from. As a team, we've been focused on the North Campus. Just to be perfectly honest with you, we've been trying to keep that ball moving forward. But we've been working on the South Campus. It's just lagging a little bit behind in the design process. But with that, I'm going to show you a couple of plans real quick if I can locate them on my computer.
And Nina, just while he pulls that up, I want you to be aware that the team for the North and the South Campus is identical. We didn't do introductions because we are using Ryan for the South Campus. We're using Bill Walsh again, and also Market Square. So all the same players are on both North and South.
Well, that's good to know because, you know, if you had two different teams, I would start to worry.
Well, I just want to state it.
No.
And basically, I mean, just from a drawing standpoint, where we are there, it really has more to do with how Ryan anticipates they will phase construction and also how Bill's going to phase permitting with buildings 1 and 2 coming first. That's really what's driving it, and that's why those buildings are further along. We have sort of gotten to a point where we feel pretty comfortable with the floor plans, so we don't anticipate that the building footprints of 3 and 4 are going to change, but we're not as developed in terms of wall sections or building elevations and those kinds of things. So we're trying to get the first item is get the footprint nailed down and utilities so that Bill and Silas can do their work, and then we'll move on to those other things. So they're just a little bit further behind buildings 1 and 2, but that's kind of where they are.
Yep. So this is the plan that we presented to you before. The buildings that Rob was just talking about was building 3 and what we call building 4, the building expansion here. So this was the plan before, and some of these footprints have changed, and we've adjusted. I'm going to turn to this plan, which is not as many pretty colors on it, but you can see the yellow on this compared to what was there before. We had something that extended out a little bit into the setbacks. We've actually made this more conforming and within the setbacks here. So we're pulling this in and sort of realigning this building slightly different than we had before. And actually pushed it just back a little bit further away from the radius of the parking. So these, as Rob said, these buildings are certainly coming together. We've got floor plans and some elevations that we've been looking at, trying to figure out grades, how this walkway comes around. So those really fine details that we're certainly working through have been a real benefit to us as the engineers, to the site engineers, trying to figure out how this all comes together. This building 4, which is is a dormitory building, we call it. Previously, it had been up here. If I switch back, we had it kind of up against the building. And what as we furthered the design, there's a transformer that's right here, a really big transformer that feeds the colony. There's electrical lines that run through here. There's sewer lines that run through here. It became a lot of obstacles to putting this building here, as well as some challenges with the foundation of the existing building and putting this building against it. So what we did do was took that, this is that transformer, this is the building, so where we had it before, we've taken it and kind of separated a little bit and shifted it in this direction. So pretty much the same size building that we had before, but we've just shifted it there. This building 4 is intended to be a green roof. I think we talked about that before. We still intend to have that as a green roof building. As well as this little end of this building, we also intend to have that as a green roof. So we are working through the details on this as well, and we do anticipate this lagging behind the North Campus resubmission. So I think we're going to probably get the North Campus into you in June, but the South Campus, this may be more like an August, I think, submission when we get it back to you. But we wanted to give you that update and let you ask any questions that you may have on this at this time.
So you have all your propane tanks in between building 3 and building 4?
I don't know that we've got those all nailed down, but we do have tanks there now. Yes, those actually exist now. So right there is where they were. So we have certain setbacks we have to maintain on those from the buildings. So we're working through those details.
Right, and Nina, those are buried with a green surface on top. So those are existing currently. We're trying to work around that also.
Okay. Right, well, I have no questions on that. Other members of the board?
I'm good, thanks.
Nope, nothing here.
None for me. Thank you.
Okay,
None for me.
okay. Oh, good.
John,
I'm glad to,
good to see
I'm
you.
glad to see it's more conforming. Yes, John, we almost have a full board now.
Stop that shit.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no questions from the board, I'll open this up for a continued public hearing. Are there any members of the public that have questions or comments? Would you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, David Strawn again from 6 and 7 Spring Valley Road. Your plan you just put out there only showed the 2 buildings highlighted in yellow. Are the other buildings closer to the Arlington Avenue area being removed? Is that part of the plan?
So to answer your question, David, the one building that's on Arlington, which is, we refer to the Gallon House with that awful looking exit there, is not on this proposal, but we are removing the dormitories that are directly on Colony Ave, the one that you kind of is right up against the stone wall, in addition to the shop and maintenance, which is also on that same side. Does that help you, David?
Yes, it does. And are you planning any sort of egress or activity on the Arlington Avenue side of your property?
No, we're actually there's going to be no egress onto Arlington Ave, and there will be actually a reduction in curb breaks on Colony Ave.
Okay, and are you doing any sort of greenery, if you will, that will on the Arlington Avenue, between your property and the properties in Arlington Avenue to sort of cover up a lot of the site views at this time?
We don't own a lot of the land. Are you talking about on the park where the current dirt parking lot is?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't own anything beyond that stone wall that's in our backyard. I mean, so there's nothing anticipated for that. Although I do want you to know that the dormitory that's proposed back there is a green roof. It's going to be super sexy. So it's going to be a really interesting building to look at, far superior to what anyone's looking at now.
John, my only comment on that is, green roofs in Maine probably have a lifespan of about 4 to 5 months. So I hope it's not a brown roof for the other 6 or 7 months.
No, we hope not as well. It's going to look probably like the rest of the grounds of the colony. We're going to do a lot of grasses more than anything else. But yeah,
Okay.
I hear what you're saying.
Thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I hope you're going to put some wildflowers in there too.
Oh, bees and everything. We're going to get them all going on there, Nina. It's going to be,
Great.
it'll be
Okay.
great.
Are there other members of the public that want to comment or ask questions?
Yes, just wanted to see if there's going to be a environmental study done over at the maintenance facility that is part of the colony there before it's looked at for. I assume it's going to be demolished.
Oh, are you talking about for the actual buildings? We're doing an environmental study on every building on the property currently. Is that what you're asking for? Other problem materials that may have been used? Yes, we're looking at all that. We're getting in a team to look at every single bit of material that's going to be in all those buildings that are slotted for removal.
That includes excavation. The construction company will be required to do any abatement and mitigation for any of that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, our pleasure.
Do you see any other hands out there? Other members of the public? Okay. Any more comments from the board? Do you hear anything? No? Well, in that case, I'll continue the public hearing, and again, we'll hope to hear from you within a month or two, hopefully. If you get everything finalized, come back and we'll look for sketches. Okay. So in that case, then we're finished here, and we'll go on. And Amy,
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
All right. We'll go on to item number 4, which is the Ivy subdivision. Sebago Techniques are the authorized agent. This is a final subdivision review, and it's the initial review for approval of changes to a subdivision. So there is no public hearing tonight. We're just going to hear the description and see if the application is complete, if I remember correctly, Werner, from the final subdivision. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. So just as a reminder to folks, we start the process over again, whenever we do a subdivision final application. So it starts off with that initial review, public hearing, and final.
And so as we continue on at the next meeting for this application, there will be a public hearing if the application is deemed complete. So is Steve Doe out there? Is he representing the Ivy subdivision tonight? If you could promote him.
Hi, all. I assume you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. Good.
Uh-huh.
Okay. It was nice watching the colony application. That was pretty impressive. So anyway, moving on to Ivy. I'll be brief because I know you've had a long evening, and I think what we've submitted is pretty simple. We've addressed the waivers that were approved. Those are noted on the subdivision plan. We have gone back and forth with some emails with Acorn Engineering. We submitted some responses to their review comment of the preliminary plan. They came back with some comments. We responded to them. I'll go over those briefly in a moment, but let me kind of go through some of the quick hitters, and then I'll come back to that. We have filed, which will be the next item, is the Cape Arundel Woods subdivision to amend that plan to respond to this project. Ralph Austin has been working with the neighbors on Endcliff to work up a road maintenance plan. Amy may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's still ongoing. I don't think we've had much response from them.
That's correct. We're not far apart, but it's still ongoing.
Yeah. We had submitted a road maintenance agreement to Mrs. Perkins. We heard back from her, and it was a very standard maintenance agreement, but her position was that right now she doesn't really pay for maintenance on that road. It's provided to her from, I think, a relative or something, so she didn't feel the need to join into a road maintenance and pay for something she's not paying for today. And we fully understand that. So I think our response back to her would be that we're going to be upgrading the road. The owner of Lot 2A will be responsible for maintenance of the road from South Main Street to the driveway of Lot 2A. And then she will be responsible for the balance of that, which is a very short section from that driveway to her house. I believe she's fine with that, but that would be our approach going forward with that. We can't, make her go into something she doesn't want to do or she's not paying for. So, and then the last item was the naming of the road. And if I understand it correctly, the road has been named Ivy Lane. We submitted a name to the town, and we heard back from them that they've accepted that, or the road committee or street naming committee has accepted that. So if I can share my screen, I'll get into the stormwater piece to talk about the concerns that Acorn has on this. And I'll go to the road plan. And I'll zoom into this. Basically, the majority of their comments have been addressed. Their only one that they have concerns about is there's a culvert under Arlington Avenue right here. It's an 18-inch culvert. And our stormwater model showed that in the 10-year, 25-year, and 50-year storm, that in the current condition, that it's overtopping this road. And that's not correct. We provided some information to Acorn about the model, the stormwater model, and showed that the model doesn't really work for this situation. The model was trying to do some other things. But anyway, we confirmed with Mike Claus that that culvert has never overtopped the road. So I think that issue I think has been resolved. There is some erosion, and kind of this entrance to this culvert is really in not good shape. So they recommended that being stabilized and riprap, and we agreed that that should happen. The other item is that there's an increase of runoff from this project due to this road. And the current plan is to just let it continue on and go out through the culvert and out into the tidal area. They provided some recommendations to the board whether we should, one, replace and upgrade this culvert, which we don't see the culvert as being an issue. The other thing would be to possibly do some detention on site to accommodate for the increase in runoff, or just approve it as it is. So there was three options there. If we have to provide detention, if the board says, yes, we want you to provide detention, most likely we're going to do it in this location because we have to capture, this portion of the road before it goes out in this area. So we really only have this area to provide some sort of detention basin to capture that, which is going to be more disturbance on the site. So whatever we disturb here will lessen what we do here for the building envelope, because we're still within this vernal pool 250-foot envelope. So we have a limit on what we can disturb. So it's really up to, I think, the board and whether you need more comments from Acorn on what direction you want us to go in. This is a very flat area. I don't see us really occupying too much if we have to go to detention, but it is more of a disturbance in that location. That's really all I have. I think the rest of the items I think are pretty clear, but if the board has comments, I'd be happy to talk through them with you.
I have a question that doesn't involve that. First, there was some question about ownership of what you're now calling Ivy Lane.
You kind of broke up a little bit, Nina.
Has that been resolved? I know that there were some letters from abutters that indicated they were copies of letters that indicated there was some ownership. Okay, Lane. There were some letters indicated there was some ownership, but some of the abutters, Ivy Lane, what you're calling Ivy Lane, has that been resolved?
I got kind of half your comment, but I think I think I got the gist of it. I think you're asking the ownership of this section of road. Is that correct? What the ownership of this is?
Yeah, I think that was the gist of the question.
Yes.
Okay. I know we have that document exists. We've provided it in the past under the previous application. I can I can resubmit that to you. It is a private road. It's not owned by the town. It's not owned by the abutters. It is a private road.
Steve, can you just, on this map, show us what you're calling Ivy Lane?
So let me zoom out. So Ivy Lane, it starts over here at Spring Valley in Arlington, and it goes the full length of all this right here. And then I believe it terminates right here. Let me go to maybe if I go to the cover page, it might show the whole thing. Bear with me here. Or the subdivision plan. Now it looks like it's the same, but I'll go to the subdivision plan. So Kings Highway used to come all the way through here, and then it continued on and went all the way to Ocean Avenue.
Right.
Portions of this have been abandoned, but it does terminate, I believe, right here. So this would be Ivy Lane, this section right here, with terminating right up at this point.
But you can't traverse it.
You can't traverse it. The only place you can traverse is right here up to Mrs. Perkins' house. I believe there's an old roadbed through here. You could walk this, but it's all overgrown. And then, of course, there's wetlands you can see down in here.
I thought the Perkins driveway was a roundabout was in the middle of it, kind of in the turnaround.
The turnaround's right here. That's the turnaround, but she parks like right here. So her driveway and kind of her front yard is like in that right of way. Her front door is like right here.
I guess I'm just questioning whether or not all of that should be claimed as Ivy Lane, or Ivy Lane should go up to and include this driveway. The rest of it should just be known as formerly Kings Highway.
I guess I would look at Warner, but I mean the road ends here, but the right of way continues all the way through.
So why not name the road and not the right of way?
I think that's exactly what Steve is saying. You know, I think what I'm hearing Steve suggest is that you know, this portion of road that it be named Ivy Lane, right, versus the right of way in its entirety.
I heard him say the opposite, Werner, but I like what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let Steve confirm what he what he said, but that's what I heard, that it would be a naming of the existing portion, existing traveled portion of what we have here, right?
Yeah, the currently useful part that someone's going to worry about plowing, and
right,
an emergency vehicle will have to name all of this Ivy. I think you're going to start more questions than you answer. But,
I mean, arguably, and again, not that it really matters for the purpose of this application, but I guess you could make a point that the naming of Ivy could extend the length, the entirety of the property that's affected, but again, from a practical perspective, I don't think that really that means anything.
I'd be tickled with that answer.
So we'll put the name like right here.
Yeah.
And then this could just be called, we can take Colony Avenue, A.K. Perkins Way, and just call it formerly Kings Highway, in this area. Does that make sense?
It does to me, and I think it goes with that whole historical vagueness that all of these deeds have copied and echoed on each other.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Thank you.
Yeah. 100 years from now, the historians they're gonna have a lot of fun with this one.
Who is this Ivy guy?
Yeah, exactly.
I have another question, Steve.
All right.
Hopefully I won't break up this time. There's There's a sewer, you're having the sewer line run under the road all the way down to the second lot?
Let me go to the grading plan. That's not the grading plan. Zoom out a little bit more so I can zoom faster. There we go. So yes, this second lot here, we're going to have a sewer force main that follows this road all the way out here and then into the public sewer.
That's a very long way to go. Are you planning to have any that sewer in case it gets clogged?
It's going to be a force main, and that's not unusual for some force mains. It'll be the responsibility of the owner of that lot 2A or 2B. They'll both have separate force mains. So they'll be responsible for that. There are ways of cleaning those out. But, you know, they put, my understanding is they put like a ball in the line and then they pressurize it and force the ball through the line to clean out if there are any plugs. But it's a very common system, and I wouldn't say that's an exceptionally long run.
Okay.
So Steve, this is Larry. So in that regard, so if they're going to insert some kind of a sphere or something in that line, is there a piping configuration that you need to install as part of the initial operation to facilitate insertion of such sphere?
Yeah, let me, I'll talk with our engineer on whether they think we need some, additional clean outs in that line to do that.
Well, let me just say it's a lot simpler to put in, access while it's being built rather than trying to retrofit it later.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree.
Okay, and there was a letter from the water department, and you're still awaiting water supply approval?
So they've accepted the water, us tying into it. And then they've reviewed our plans. I did get a letter from them, which I didn't give to you, I forgot. They wanted just some additional valving over here. And I think another valve at the end of the line here. So we'll make those changes. I'll get that letter to you. But they have accepted the flows.
Okay. That's all I have. Are there other members of the board that have questions?
Well, I just wanted to thank Steve for confirming the adequacy of that existing 18-inch HDPE pipe. What I remember from the Acorn report was that the road added something like 2 cubic feet per second, more or less, to the flows that you showed in your stormwater management report. So is it worthwhile updating the stormwater management report just to show the impact, the additional outflow or drainage that occurs due to the road, and then talking about reasons why the current configuration, basically the whole lot is a giant sort of a retention pond just because of all the vegetation.
Yeah, this big well in here.
Yeah, and why the 70 cubic feet per second is not going to happen. It's just really going to be 14 cubic feet per second, which is the capacity of the HDPE pipe. It might be useful just to document all that in a single, discussion or addendum to the report, something like that.
Okay.
Just capture it all.
Did you get the last letter that Chris in our office sent to Acorn? I think
I did. That's where he says it. That's where he points out that.
April 30th is the date, so it's fairly recent.
I think so. Isn't that where you're addressing the peer review that Acorn did and saying that, okay, even though it seems like if there was no vegetation or no holdup, that you would get 70 cubic feet per second, but in fact, what actually happens is that it's only 14 cubic feet per second.
Yep.
Because the whole area is just a gigantic, provides a lot of resistance to flow. So that's what I'm saying. If you could just, I think it'd really be useful to update the stormwater management report to clarify that issue, so there's no confusion in future about why it's, about the capacity of the adequacy of the 18-inch pipe there.
Nope, no, we can do that.
Thank you.
Are there other comments from the board? Okay, I think there were
Tom
some
Boak's on.
waivers.
I believe all the waivers were granted at the preliminary stage, unless there's some open ones that I'm not aware of.
We were good on all of them, Steve.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Right, so these carry over to the final subdivision, if I remember correctly.
And they are noted on the final plan. We list the waivers and then noted that they were approved at the preliminary plan stage and dated when they were granted.
Okay. Good. Are there if there are no other comments from the board, I'll take a motion to deem this final subdivision application as complete.
So moved.
Moved. That's me and Ed, we tied. So if Ed, I'll second Ed's motion.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
And, okay, members of the board,
Mr.
I'm in
Barker's
favor.
hand raised.
Right, and, oh, yes, he does have his hand raised. Tom, you want to go ahead?
No, I'm fine.
Oh, you better put your hand down then.
I'll have to try. Lower hand. How's that?
Good job, all right.
Okay, okay, now you can raise it again to approve the motion if you want.
Okay, how about I approve it without that?
Okay, fine. Larry?
Approve, yep.
Okay. Who else John?
Approve.
John, are you still there?
Yes, approve.
Okay. Okay. I think, wait a minute. George, are you still there?
I am, but I don't know that I'm a voting member now that the chairman is here, but I'd approve if I am.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
Post quorum.
All right. The motion is carried, and then the application is complete. And at the May 19th meeting, if you want to go forward, we'll have a public hearing.
Great.
Along with a million other things.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. And that should be good. Okay.
Yeah.
So that concludes application number 4, and we go to application number 5, in which I believe, Steve, you stay on the line. And that's the that's the Cape Arundel Woods Sebago Techniques authorized agent, basically for the 3rd amended subdivision minor amendment regarding Lot 2A. Do you want to describe that for us?
Yes, again, it's even simpler than the first one. It's I'll just share my screen and go
while
to
you're
that.
While you're doing that, I'll point out that your authorization letter has expired and that you need a new authorization letter.
All right.
So this is kind of a carryover from the Ivy subdivision, which is over here. This is the Cape Arundel Woods. And the only change to this was adding or increasing this setback to 30 feet.
Yep.
And then we had, in this original project, there was a hammerhead turnaround over here. And we've eliminated that because we've added a turnaround down at this end over here. So that's really the only change to this this plan. Very minor change. And that's the extent of it. I don't really have
Steve,
anything else.
Look, a nit question. You didn't remove the phrase proposed road with the curly arrows that were showing the span of the old turnaround. Was that intentional?
Yeah, there's the road's really, if you've been down there, this road needs to be rebuilt.
Yeah, but it is the road.
It is the road, yes. There is a road all the way through here now. You just, as you probably saw on the site walk, it's not passable by, unless you have a four-wheel drive. But there is a road here, but it does need to be upgraded. If that.
So your point is that you're doing that as part of
the Ivy project.
The Ivy project. Yeah, it's just before those arrows pointed to the entrance to the turnaround. I thought maybe you just left them there accidentally.
No, we do have to add this road in here. As part of this original project, this road was supposed to come up to here and turn around. And it really wasn't built to the standard that was approved.
I withdraw my statement. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Are there other questions, comments from the board?
Very clear. So with the problem with the authorization letter, other than that, I would move that this application is complete.
Second.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that. That's Larry.
Okay, and let's take a vote. Ed,
I concur.
and Tom?
Concur.
Okay. Larry,
Concur.
John,
Concur.
and I concur. Are we missing anyone? George, you said you weren't voting. Are you voting?
On principle, but yes, I would.
Okay. Okay.
It doesn't count for anything.
All right. Well,
You
then
missed
the
it, Tom. I got the second emotion officially.
Oh, hot damn.
Yeah, big night.
then the motion carries and this application is deemed complete. And I believe we still need to hold a public hearing. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this application will go forward and the next time it's brought forward, probably on May 19th with everything else that's on our plate, we'll have the public hearing on this. Okay.
And are you taking this one also or do we have to assign another stockade?
Say again? Were you asking me?
I was asking if you were.
It's related. I don't have a problem with grabbing this.
Okay, good.
It'll be a separate findings though.
Yes, it will.
I
I'll do
just assumed he was going to be part of it. So, okay. I'll take one more motion then. If anyone wants to
We
make.
adjourn.
Werner's raising his hand.
Yep. I have one item of business. I just want to confirm who will be in attendance for the public hearing with the Board of Selectmen on the 13th for the warrant article hearing.
I will.
I can be there.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got it in my calendar. That's at 6 p.m. on the 13th, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, I got it in my calendar.
I'll be there. Super.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, I need
Just making sure we'll have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, so I need a second to a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Yep,
Aye.
in favor.
Okay, I think we're done here for the night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
Good
job.
night,
everybody.
Good night.
Good
Thank you
night.
very
Good job.
much.
Yep, thanks.